So good morning, everyone. I'm Camille Jimenez, Program Director of Pfizer's Institute of Translational Equitable Medicine, for short ITEM. And today I'll be, here talking to you about what Pfizer is doing in relation to exploring AI and also what it looks like across the drug development pathway. And I'm super excited to be here with all of you, experts in AI, and also those who are interested in how we're leveraging AI in medicine. Because I think that when we think about AI and industries overall, compared to medicine, AI adoption has been a bit slower, right? And rightfully so, because the stakes are higher. We're talking about people's lives, we're talking about people's healthcare. And so we need to be really thoughtful and intentional and responsible how we're leveraging AI and the tools. So we're here today because we care about this topic, but we're also here because how do we do this together the right way? Because this is really about, partnership and thinking about the next phase of AI in medicine. So as I mentioned today, I'll take you on this journey of, how we're leveraging and looking at AI across the drug development continuum, but also give you an example of how we're leveraging AI at the bedside for the patient, specifically looking at improving health literacy. But, I promise you, I'm not going to talk about AI models specifically because I know you all are probably extremely more experts than I am in this. But what I do want to talk about is, the data behind those AI models in medicine, because that's the critical piece here. So I was speaking to one of the professors just a bit ago, and I was saying, this is an incredible time in medicine and AI, right? Because the promise of transforming healthcare is here, right? And we have to really think about our future selves and what we want out of AI today in terms of as we age and progress and go through our own healthcare journey. And as we hold AI to a high standard in medicine, we have to think about not only the innovation, but the potential impact that it has on patients. And when we are looking at the data and thinking about AI models, there's some assumptions that we have to make. And these are some hard questions that we'll have to ask up front. And some of those questions are, when we're developing these models on data, who is included in the data and who is not included in the data? We also have to think about, when patients are getting a result back that, perhaps it's their cancer risk score and they have maybe an uncertain cancer risk. Is it because perhaps people like them were not represented in the algorithm that developed this risk score? So these are some of those hard questions that we have to ask, and this is how we really think about equity and AI responsibly. So as I mentioned, there's this growing recognition of AI across industries. And I know that if we continue to build these AI systems the right way, it really will help us, make better clinical decisions and also hopefully reduce bias and improve health outcomes. And that's why I think there's so much momentum around AI in healthcare, because it's not that we're looking at it as parallel goals. We're actually looking at how these two things are deeply connected, right? We live in a world where AI is deeply connected with who we are, and it's deeply connected with our own health as well. So in Pfizer and industry overall, we sit on a wealth of data. There's not a shortage of data in industry. And because of that, we're always constantly asking ourselves, what's the right data set to use? What's the question that we're asking? And, is the data representative? Is, the data complete? And so what biases exist in the data? And the answers to these questions have consequences, and how we move forward really will drive, the next generation of treatments for different diseases. And so when we're thinking about AI, we're thinking very intentionally about the landscape of the quality of the data sets, the questions that we're asking, and also because bias in data, as you know, is not theoretical, it's historical, and bias in data is ongoing. So we've seen in research and clinical trials the unintended consequences of a lack of representation. For example, for decades, women of childbearing age were not allowed to be included in clinical trials. And we know the result of that today. Many times we don't understand how drugs work in women of childbearing ages. And this is an example of if we were to take that data at the time that women were not included in clinical trials and run AI models on that data, then it's not representative, right? There's bias in that data. So again, thinking intentionally about what is this data that we're leveraging is critical when we're developing our models. So this is, again, not just about AI. This is about thinking responsibly about that foundational data. And again, that is representative and clinically meaningful. And so one critical area and opportunity for really building out robust data, foundational data, is in drug discovery. So that means that, we're thinking about data sets carefully along this drug development pathway, which, it's all the way from preclinical research, where we're thinking about genomics data, our own metabolomics, our proteomics, all of our cells, how they're working. What data are we using to understand how our cells are working? Because that same data is what we're using to identify potential treatments and targets for therapies. And so you'll see that, when you think about AI and drug discovery, there's opportunity for AI along the continuum of drug development. And, we know that AI can help speed things up, which is fantastic, again, but the stakes are high for healthcare, right? And so we have to be cautious when we're doing this. And I'll be honest, a lot of the times, people will say, well, it takes how long? Well, actually, does anyone know how long it takes to develop a drug?
More than 10 years?
More than 10 to 15 years. And 90% of drug candidates actually fail when they get to the clinical development phase. So if you think about that, like you spend all of these years developing a candidate, it gets to clinical development and it fails. We're talking about billions of dollars being spent to just develop one possible treatment. So people are super excited about AI, right? What can AI do to really speed up this process, but also, help us in terms of our, failures and delays. And so the way that we ensure that this is equitable, again, goes back to our foundational data. How do we ensure that when we're developing and identifying a drug candidate, that it will work in the patient, that it'll be effective, it'll be safe for the patients in clinical development? And leveraging AI in this preclinical phase is how we are able to really increase our chances of those drug targets, and that these drug targets are meaningful for patients, right? So we always talk about for patients, what is the most important aspect for a patient? People will say, well, I want to be cured, or I just want to, not have to live with the side effects of this disease, right? Sometimes it's not about cure. So we think about all of these things up front when we're going to identify a potential target. And again, I will stress this, I'll keep stressing this, and I know you all probably know this, representation is key in data. And so on the other end of that, more upstream, we talk about patient care. So how are we leveraging AI at the bedside with patients? And so one concept I'll come back to is health literacy, which is, how do we understand the materials that are being given to us? How do we understand how to take, we really understand how we need to take our medication, how our experience and interaction is with the healthcare. So AI has tremendous opportunity there as well. All right, so I know there's a lot on this slide, but we've spoken a lot about, preclinical data and identifying opportunities for target validation and developing new treatments. One of the, I think, the missing links, again, in scaling equitable AI is representative data, right? And so if we think about, preclinical research, what we call multi-omics, which is this genomics, epigenomics, transcriptomics, that's what multi-omics is. There are many different ways that we can leverage AI to understand modes of actions of drugs, identifying perhaps, how are we metabolizing these drugs, and looking at all of this together. And so it's really important to think about that up until now. The reality is that the majority of data that has identified potential targets has been largely on European ancestry. Largely on European ancestry. And so why is this important, right? We actually have real world examples of instances where therapies, there's a common one, it's actually one that is to prevent blood clots after a heart attack. We found in the real world that 1 out of 5 people of Japanese descent had a genetic variation that didn't allow them to metabolize this drug appropriately. So they were taking this medication and they were not getting the benefits that this medication was intended to have. And it wasn't until we got to the real world that we understood this issue, this bias, right, this flaw. And now, had we had more data early on, perhaps we would have found that, right? So this idea of representation in the earliest data sets that we have to identify targets is critical to avoid these mishaps, these unfortunate, circumstances later on when patients are really thinking that they're doing something great, right? They're taking their medicine, they're, following the guidelines, but they're not receiving the benefits. So at Pfizer, we are thinking about this every day in all that we're doing. And again, this is why representation matters in the data, more so when we're now layering on AI as a solution. And so what is Pfizer doing about this challenge of foundational data? So I'm going to talk you through this case study. Can't see the title too well here. So I'll talk you through this foundational data set that we have for a case study. So we know that prostate cancer mortality is highest in sub-Saharan Africa, but this population is almost entirely absent from global cancer genomics. I mean, how, right? Like, how are they absent from global cancer genomics? And this is a huge problem, not just because of, who's missing from the data, it is a problem, who's missing from the data, but also what are we missing by not having these patients in the data from a scientific lens? We're missing critical information, exploratory information, right? And so as scientists, we don't just study people who are most affected, right? We want to focus, we want to study everyone. And so if we don't understand everyone's disease risk biology, what is their potential treatment response? We miss that opportunity to save lives. And that's why we're in, the field of medicine, because we want to save lives. We want people to have optimal healthcare. We want people to live long lives with their families. And so this is why I'm so proud of this collaboration you see here, collaboration with Pfizer and the African Caribbean Cancer Consortium. Through this collaboration, we are partnering with 17 sites across the US, the Caribbean, and sub-Saharan Africa to identify genetic and social determinants of cancer in global African ancestry populations. This is the first of its kind of a data genomic study that really looks at not just the genetics, but also those social and environmental drivers. And so when we think about disease and the progression of disease, it's not just, again, about your genetics, it's about your lived experience. We know that sometimes your environment has an effect on your genomes and how you're responding to medication as well. So these are things that this data set and this partnership, partnering with investigators from the community, has afforded us to bring into Pfizer to now really explore cancer genomics in a representative way. So I'm super excited about this collaboration, and we actually finished recruiting all of the patients recently. So now we're getting to the point where we really start analyzing the data. So it's a really fantastic opportunity. And I think that if we get this right, we'll start building predictive models that are representative. We'll start building and advancing equitable AI in medicine for patients, and we'll see, hopefully see the benefit in hopefully faster than 10 to 15 years with AI. All right, so I shared with you earlier that we have tons of data in industry. And when we think about that multi-omics portfolio, we also have real-world data. So real-world data is, once the clinical trial is complete, what is happening with patients in the real world? We follow patients. When you go to your hospital and you have your medical records, that's what we call real-world data. And we have this opportunity to bring together all of this complex data, multi-omics, real-world evidence, even biomedical imaging, in a way that we've never before been able to do, and that is because of AI. So I think that it's this depth of diversity in the data that really gives us the opportunity to have multiple use cases for AI when we're thinking about leveraging these foundational data sets. Also, even thinking about meta-analyses. I mean, meta-analyses can be done in days now. You know, it used to take months before, right? So these are those kinds of examples apply to these foundational data sets that we're using in industry as well. All right, so now let's pivot to the other end I talked to you about earlier today, which is more that patient journey. And so here I want to hone in on this point of patients receiving care at the bedside, patients, you know, meeting their doctors, talking to their doctors about, you know, their medicines. And so this is where this concept of health literacy comes in. So I'll ask everyone here, how many of us here have had to take a medicine, any kind of medicine, at any point in our lives? Yes. And when you open that medicine box, you will see potentially a leaflet here. How many of us have read every single word in this leaflet from front to back? I haven't. And we are, this is it, right? This is no one reads these leaflets. They're dense. There's a lot of them. The texts are small. There's a lot of medical jargon in there. It's not patient friendly. Yet it's given to the patient, right? And so, you know, at Pfizer, we recognize that it's not enough to just give a patient, right, their medication. We want to make sure that patients understand, you know, why they're taking their medication, how they're taking their medication, and how their medicines work. Because if you don't take your medicines, how they work, then you're not going to get the benefit of it. And so this idea of health literacy, really understanding how to use your medicine correctly and then getting the benefit of it is critical, because if not, we see all of these outcomes happen. So, you know, people will use their medication in an unsafe and inappropriate way. I think about my grandmother. My grandmother, she's not with us anymore, but she had diabetes. And this woman would wake up and, you know, she'd say, today I feel fine, I'm not taking my diabetes medication. And then throughout the day, she'd say, oh, I feel like my sugar is high, let me check my sugar. And she'll say, I have to take my medication because my sugar is high, right? And it wasn't for a lack of not explaining to her, you know, this is how you have to take it. She just had low health literacy. And then pile on top of that, English was not her first language, right? So these are some of the challenges that patients face, and they think that they're taking it the right way. Right? They are doing it in good faith. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting patients to really understand how to take their medicines and why they need to take it the way that it's being prescribed. And so the scale of health literacy as an issue is massive. It's a global issue. So you'll see here, 48% of adults in Europe have limited health literacy. In the United States, 88% of adults have limited health literacy. So this is not a small problem, it's a global issue. Pfizer is a global company, and so we recognize that there was this opportunity here to think about really helping our patients become more health literate. And so in 2021, Pfizer put out our first ever position paper on health literacy to ensure that patients benefit from our breakthrough medicines and vaccines to achieve better health outcomes. And we continue to do this work in multiple ways. So we are ensuring that all of our patient-facing materials have these three critical components that are specific to health literacy. Our materials have to be readable. That means making sure that the language is simple and clear. We have to make sure that it's understandable, that it makes sense to the patient, right, what they're reading, and that it's actionable, that patients know what it is that they need to do next. And so where does AI come into this, right? So before AI, we had our colleagues, you know, our experts in the field, looking at materials, reading the materials by, you know, one by one, assessing, okay, we think we should change this, we should, you know, we should do this and improve it. But now we have developed what is called CLEAR. And CLEAR is a health literacy tool that we developed using large language model in partnership with our patient advocacy partners. And CLEAR really uses a human-centered design, so that's really partnering with our advocacy groups as well as AI-driven tools to review all of our patient-facing materials. And this is actually a first-in-class AI tool specific to health literacy. And we're so proud of this because it really has been a game changer for our patients. And so it's not just something that works for text. It actually can look at images and provide feedback on images to see if the images are actually meeting health literacy best practices for visuals, because health literacy also not just applies to text. You are finding into charts and graphs. You see all these graphs of data when you receive medicine. Are these images clear to the patient, right? Do they understand them? Even something like, you'll see this image here on the right, on the left, when we ran it through our Gen AI model, it provided feedback that it did not meet the guidelines for compliance with health literacy best practices. And then it returned to us a recommendation. So you'll see in the back, we have that clutter of images, the poster in the back removed. And so it's a very clean image, so we can focus on the patient here. And so these are the types of things that patients are looking for because it's easier to understand. And so CLEAR is expanding globally. We now have CLEAR in over, I think, 50 countries. It's translated into, I think, over 80 languages as well. And we are really using this tool all throughout Pfizer. And so we're looking at, within our publications, we always have a plain language summary so that when patients read articles published in, prestigious journals, there's a plain language summary that they can understand what exactly the article is talking about. So we use CLEAR to ensure that that summary meets health literacy best practices. We use CLEAR for our informed consents in clinical trials, also our protocol development and global labeling, all of our labeling information as well. So the list goes on, and so we're excited because I think as the time goes on, there's always new opportunities for leveraging CLEAR, both internally and externally from Pfizer. And so today I've taken you through two critical points: the drug development pathway and also how we can leverage AI at the bedside with patients. And AI has this potential really to accelerate the way that we interact and experience our healthcare. And while I gave you two really different examples, both are critical for the patient. Both are critical for understanding data insights and the impact that it'll have to ensure that data really is truly fit for purpose. And so we see AI as a responsibility at Pfizer. We know that it's our responsibility to ensure that our AI models are equitable, that the data that we're using is representative. And so in order to ensure that we're conducting the best science as possible, we have experts, across the continuum, really looking at the work that we're doing. So I'm excited, right? I'm excited to really be here and hear from all of you as well. Perhaps some questions that you have, some thoughts, because as we move quickly with AI in medicine, we have to do this together. Improving AI and the data, the foundational data sets is not just a siloed activity. It is what happens in partnership. So thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to open it up for questions, comments, or discussion amongst all.